For decades, the world has seen Snoop Dogg as the man who never seems to lose his cool. Whether he's making hit records, starring in movies, or making millions through unexpected business ventures, he always appears to be smiling. But behind that laid-back image lies a story very few people truly understand. As Snoop reaches 54, the weight of personal loss, family struggles, health scares, public criticism, and the pressure of protecting an empire has revealed a side of him that fans rarely get to see. The question isn't how he became a legend, it's what that legendary success has quietly cost him along the way. Long before the world knew him as Snoop Dogg, before the platinum albums, sold-out arenas, and billion-dollar brand partnerships, there was a young boy named Calvin Cortazar Broadus Jr. growing up in Long Beach, California. The image most fans recognize today, a calm, charismatic entertainer with an unmistakable voice, was shaped by a childhood that was anything but easy. Born in 1971, Calvin entered a world where opportunity often felt limited. His father was largely absent from his life, leaving his mother, Beverly Tate, to raise him. She worked hard to keep the family together, instilling discipline and faith in her son despite the challenges surrounding them. Those close to the family have often described Beverly as one of the strongest influences in Calvin's life, encouraging him to stay connected to church even as the streets outside painted a very different picture. As a child, Calvin sang in the church choir and played piano. Few people could have imagined that the soft-spoken boy performing gospel music would one day become one of the biggest names in hip-hop. Music gave him confidence, but it also offered something even more valuable, a temporary escape. Outside the church walls, Long Beach was changing rapidly. Gang activity was increasing, violence was becoming a normal part of daily life, and young people were constantly forced to make choices that could define the rest of their lives. Calvin wasn't immune to those influences. Like many teenagers in his neighborhood, he became associated with the Rollin' 20s Crips, a decision he has openly acknowledged in interviews over the years. It's important to understand the environment rather than reduce it to a simple choice. For many young people growing up in neighborhoods affected by poverty and crime, gangs often represented protection, belonging, and survival more than anything else. That doesn't excuse the consequences, but it helps explain why so many promising lives were pulled in that direction. Calvin's teenage years included several run-ins with law enforcement, and there were moments when his future seemed uncertain. Friends around him were being arrested, injured, or worse. Every day carried risks that many people watching from the outside could barely imagine. Looking back, Snoop has often reflected that surviving those years was, in many ways, a matter of luck as much as determination. Yet amid the chaos, another world was beginning to open. Music became more than a hobby, it became a lifeline. Alongside close friends Warren G. and Nate Dogg, Calvin began recording homemade tracks and experimenting with a style that blended laid-back storytelling with unmistakable charisma. They called themselves 213, named after Long Beach's area code at the time. Their recordings weren't polished, but they carried something impossible to fake: authenticity. Unlike many aspiring rappers trying to imitate others, Calvin had a voice that stood out immediately. His relaxed delivery, vivid storytelling, and effortless rhythm made even ordinary moments sound captivating. It wasn't long before people in the local music scene started noticing. Then came the moment that would alter his life forever. One of the group's demo tapes eventually reached producer Dr. Dre, who had recently left NWA and was searching for fresh talent. Dre immediately recognized something special. Snoop wasn't just another rapper. He had a sound unlike anyone else in hip-hop. That opportunity launched a career few could have predicted, but success didn't erase everything that came before it. The memories of violence, instability, and constant uncertainty didn't disappear the moment fame arrived. Instead, they became part of the emotional foundation that shaped his music and public persona. Behind the humor, confidence, and effortless cool was someone who had spent years learning to stay calm in situations where panic could be deadly. Those early experiences also explain why Snoop has repeatedly emphasized loyalty throughout his career. For someone who grew up never knowing who might still be standing beside him tomorrow, loyalty wasn't just a virtue, it was survival. As his music began reaching audiences far beyond Long Beach, millions saw a rising superstar. What they couldn't see was the emotional weight he continued to carry from the neighborhood that made him. And as fame accelerated faster than anyone expected, those old scars would collide with an entirely new set of pressures, ones that threatened to change his life all over again. By the early 1990s, Calvin Broadus was no longer just another young man from Long Beach. Under the name Snoop Dogg, he became one of the most talked about new voices in hip-hop almost overnight. His first major appearance on Dr. Dre's landmark album, The Chronic, introduced listeners to a rapper whose smooth delivery stood out in an era dominated by aggressive styles. Critics praised him, fans couldn't get enough of him, and record executives realized they were witnessing the birth of a superstar. Then came Doggy Style. Released in 1993, the album debuted at #1 on the Billboard charts, selling hundreds of thousands of copies in its first week. For a debut album, the achievement was extraordinary. Songs like Gin and Juice and What's My Name became cultural phenomena, and Snoop's face seemed to be everywhere. To the public, it looked like a dream. But behind the scenes, life was becoming far more complicated than anyone realized. Fame didn't arrive gradually. It exploded. One day, he was navigating the streets of Long Beach. The next, he was one of the biggest names in music, surrounded by cameras, executives, security, and fans who expected him to always be the same confident, carefree personality they saw in interviews and music videos. That kind of overnight transformation brings enormous pressure. Every move was analyzed. Every lyric sparked debate. Every interview generated headlines. The image of Snoop Dogg quickly became larger than Calvin Broadus himself, creating expectations that were nearly impossible to escape. At the same time, Death Row Records had become one of the most powerful and controversial labels in the music industry. Led by the larger-than-life Suge Knight, the label dominated rap music, but it also attracted constant media attention for reasons that had little to do with music. Stories of internal conflicts, rivalries, legal disputes, and violence surrounded the company, making every artist associated with it part of a much bigger narrative. For Snoop, this meant living under an almost constant spotlight. Then came one of the darkest chapters of his early career. In 1993, shortly before Doggy Style was released, Snoop became involved in a fatal shooting connected to his bodyguard. He was charged with murder, and suddenly the rising star who had captivated the music world was facing the possibility of spending much of his life behind bars. The case dominated headlines for months. Television cameras followed every court appearance. Newspapers questioned whether hip-hop was encouraging violence. Commentators debated whether Snoop was an entertainer, a criminal, or both. Long before social media existed, his name became one of the biggest stories in American entertainment. For someone barely in his 20s, the pressure was unimaginable. While millions celebrated his music, he was simultaneously preparing legal defenses, meeting with attorneys, and wondering what the future might hold. Years later, Snoop has spoken about how emotionally exhausting that period was. Success no longer felt carefree. Every achievement came with uncertainty. Every award ceremony was overshadowed by the knowledge that serious legal proceedings were still unfolding. Eventually, he and his bodyguard were acquitted, allowing him to continue his career. But experiences like that leave lasting marks. Even after the verdict, public perception remained divided. Some viewed him as proof that people could overcome adversity. Others continued to judge him based on headlines rather than the full legal outcome. As the years passed, Snoop also witnessed another side of fame, the constant expectation to remain relevant. The music industry moves quickly. New artists emerge every year, trends change almost overnight, and yesterday's superstar can easily become today's forgotten headline. For many performers, that pressure becomes overwhelming. Yet Snoop refused to disappear. He experimented with different musical styles, collaborated with artists across generations, and embraced opportunities outside music, from television appearances to acting and business ventures. Reinvention became one of his greatest strengths. Still, no amount of professional success could completely shield him from the emotional toll of living under public scrutiny. Behind every smiling interview and every memorable performance was a man balancing enormous expectations with deeply personal responsibilities. The world saw an untouchable icon. But away from the flashing cameras and sold-out concerts, another role meant even more to him, a role that would soon redefine his priorities in ways fame never could. For millions of fans, Snoop Dogg is the definition of cool, a music icon whose career has stretched across decades without ever seeming to lose momentum. But ask the people closest to him, and many would tell you that his greatest source of pride has never been an album, an award, or a business deal. It's his family. While the headlines often focused on his music and celebrity lifestyle, Snoop worked to build something far more personal behind the scenes. His relationship with his high school sweetheart, Shantae Broaddus, became one of the most enduring love stories in entertainment. The two married in 1997 after years of being together, and despite the pressures of fame, they chose to keep fighting for their family. That journey wasn't perfect. Like many long-term relationships, there's experienced difficult seasons. Public reports of separation, rumors of infidelity, and the strain that comes with living under constant media attention tested their marriage more than once. At one point, Snoop even filed for divorce. From the outside, it appeared that one of hip-hop's longest-lasting marriages might be over. But something changed. Rather than walking away for good, the couple reconciled. Over the years, Snoop has spoken candidly about realizing that fame had distracted him from what truly mattered. He has credited Shantae with helping keep him grounded, reminding him that behind the celebrity image was still the young man from Long Beach trying to build a meaningful life. That lesson would become even more important as their family grew. Together, they raised children while navigating a level of fame few parents could imagine. Snoop has often described fatherhood as one of the greatest responsibilities of his life. No matter how successful he became, he knew his children weren't looking for a superstar, they were looking for a father. Balancing those two identities wasn't always easy. Concert tours meant long stretches away from home. Recording sessions stretched late into the night. Business opportunities multiplied with every passing year. Yet Snoop repeatedly made efforts to stay involved in his children's lives, attending sporting events, celebrating milestones, and encouraging them to pursue their own passions rather than simply living in his shadow. As time passed, another role transformed him once again. He became a grandfather. Fans noticed a softer side of Snoop whenever he spoke about his grandchildren. The man once known primarily for hard-hitting rap lyrics suddenly found himself smiling through family photos, sharing playful moments, and embracing a quieter kind of happiness. It was a reminder that even global icons can find their greatest joy in life's simplest moments. But those joyful moments made the painful ones even harder to bear. In 2019, tragedy struck the Broaddus family when Snoop's infant grandson, Kai Love, passed away at just 10 days old due to a congenital heart condition. The loss devastated the family. For someone who had spent decades projecting confidence and resilience, this was different. There are some forms of pain that fame cannot soften. Although Snoop largely chose to grieve privately, those close to the family shared glimpses of the heartbreak they experienced. Messages about faith, healing, and cherishing every moment with loved ones reflected a family trying to process an unimaginable loss together. The tragedy also reinforced something Snoop had been realizing for years. Money cannot buy more time. Awards cannot erase grief. Fame cannot protect the people you love. In the months that followed, Snoop continued working, performing, and appearing in public, but fans who paid close attention noticed a deeper sense of gratitude whenever he spoke about family. Success no longer seemed to be measured by chart positions or business ventures. Instead, it was measured by birthdays celebrated, children growing up, and simply having loved ones around the dinner table. Those experiences quietly reshaped his priorities. The entertainer who once seemed driven primarily by career ambitions increasingly spoke about legacy. Not just the legacy he would leave in music, but the legacy he would leave as a husband, father, grandfather, and mentor. Yet life had another painful lesson waiting for him. As the years passed, Snoop began watching friends, collaborators, and fellow hip-hop legends disappear one by one, forcing him to confront a question he had spent much of his life avoiding. What happens when the people who helped build your journey are no longer here to walk it with you? By the time Snoop Dogg reached his 50s, he had accomplished almost everything an artist could dream of. He had sold millions of records, built successful businesses, acted in films and television, and transformed himself into a global cultural icon. From the outside, it looked like a life filled with victories. But there was another reality unfolding behind the scenes. The longer Snoop remained in the spotlight, the more often he found himself saying goodbye. The hip-hop generation that helped shape his career was getting older. Some artists retired. Others disappeared from public life. And far too many passed away long before anyone expected. Each loss carried its own weight. Some were collaborators who had shared recording studios and stages with him. Others were lifelong friends who had known Calvin Broadus before the world ever knew Snoop Dogg. These weren't just names in newspaper headlines. They were people who had helped define entire chapters of his life. Among the losses that deeply affected him was the passing of Nate Dogg, one of his closest friends and a fellow member of the Long Beach group 213. Nate wasn't simply another artist. He was family. Together with Warren G., the three had dreamed about making it out of Long Beach through music. They celebrated each other's successes, shared struggles, and helped define the unmistakable West Coast sound that changed hip-hop forever. When Nate Dogg died in 2011 after years of serious health complications, Snoop openly mourned the loss. Tributes poured in from across the music industry, but for Snoop, no public statement could fully capture what it felt like to lose someone who had been beside him long before fame arrived. Then came more heartbreak. The deaths of fellow artists like Tupac Shakur, DMX, Coolio, and others served as painful reminders that life could change in an instant. Each passing forced Snoop to reflect on how fragile success really is. He had watched careers rise and fall. He had seen fortunes made and lost. He had witnessed friendships tested by fame. And he had learned that no amount of wealth could stop time. One loss in particular seemed to resonate across the entire basketball and entertainment world: the death of Kobe Bryant in 2020. Like millions of people, Snoop struggled to process the shocking news. Kobe wasn't just a sports legend. He represented discipline, ambition, and excellence to countless people, including artists who admired his relentless work ethic. Snoop's emotional tributes reflected not only admiration for Bryant, but also a growing awareness of how suddenly life can change. Those moments gradually shifted his perspective. Earlier in his career, success often meant selling more records, earning more awards, or expanding his business empire. Now, success began to mean something else entirely. It meant waking up healthy. It meant hearing his grandchildren laugh. It meant spending another holiday with the people he loved. Fans also noticed that Snoop increasingly spoke about gratitude. Interviews that once centered almost exclusively on music evolved into conversations about family, faith, mentorship, and appreciating life's smaller moments. That evolution wasn't accidental. It came from experience. After spending decades in one of the world's most competitive industries, Snoop understood something younger artists often overlook. Longevity is both a blessing and a burden. The blessing is surviving long enough to enjoy everything you've built. The burden is watching others disappear before they get the same chance. Few people discuss that emotional cost. Every reunion carries empty spaces. Every celebration reminds you of someone who should still be there. Every achievement feels a little different when you can't share it with the friends who helped you dream about it decades earlier. Despite those emotions, Snoop never allowed grief to completely define him. Instead, he chose to honor those he lost by continuing to create, mentor younger artists, and celebrate the culture they had all helped build together. Yet even as he carried those memories forward, another challenge emerged. The public expected Snoop Dogg to remain timeless, to stay relevant, to keep reinventing himself, to smile through every interview as though nothing had changed. And remarkably, he did exactly that. But behind every new business venture, television appearance, and viral moment was a man quietly asking himself a question that becomes more urgent with age. How do you keep moving forward without leaving behind the person you used to be? In an industry where careers can disappear overnight, Snoop Dogg accomplished something extremely rare. He refused to become a memory. For many artists who reach the level of fame Snoop achieved, there comes a point where the world starts asking the same question: what happens next? The albums slow down, younger artists take over the charts, and the spotlight begins moving towards someone else. But Snoop never allowed himself to stay trapped in one era. Instead, he transformed. The same artist who became famous through gritty West Coast rap eventually became a household name far beyond music. He entered television, movies, advertising, sports entertainment, cooking shows, and business ventures, proving that his influence extended far beyond the recording studio. To some people, these moves were surprising. A rapper known for controversial lyrics suddenly became one of the most recognizable and approachable personalities in entertainment. He appeared in family-friendly projects, worked with major brands, and developed a reputation for humor, honesty, and an ability to connect with almost any audience. But this transformation wasn't accidental. Snoop understood something many entertainers never learn. Relevance requires evolution. The world changes, audiences change, culture changes, and anyone who refuses to adapt risks being left behind. One of the biggest examples of Snoop's reinvention came through his unexpected collaborations and ventures outside traditional hip-hop. He became a recognizable figure in sports, technology, cannabis entrepreneurship, and television. His ability to move between different worlds made him less of a celebrity and more of a cultural brand. Perhaps the most surprising chapter of this transformation was his friendship and professional partnership with Martha Stewart. At first, the pairing seemed almost impossible. A legendary rapper from Long Beach and a famous lifestyle personality, known for cooking and home design, appeared to come from completely different universes. Yet their chemistry became undeniable, showing audiences a side of Snoop that many had never seen. He wasn't just the intimidating rapper from the 1990s. He was funny. He was curious. He was comfortable being himself. That authenticity became one of his greatest strengths. But reinvention also came with challenges. When someone becomes as recognizable as Snoop Dogg, every decision is analyzed. Every partnership creates opinions. Every career move invites criticism. Some fans questioned whether he was moving too far away from his original image. Others criticized his business choices or wondered whether his constant appearances were changing how people viewed him as an artist. Snoop, however, seemed less concerned with preserving an old image and more interested in creating a complete life. After decades of being defined by one version of himself, he seemed determined to show people there was more to him than the character they knew from music videos. This was especially important as he grew older. The entertainment world often celebrates youth. New faces constantly replace old ones, and many performers struggle when they no longer fit the industry's traditional idea of a superstar. But Snoop turned aging into another opportunity. Instead of hiding his age, he embraced it. He became proof that longevity itself could be a form of success. At 50 and beyond, he continued performing, building businesses, appearing in major events, and reaching younger audiences who weren't even born when he released his earliest hits. Yet behind all this success was a complicated reality. The more responsibilities Snoop took on, the more people depended on him. He wasn't only an artist anymore. He was a father, a grandfather, a businessman, a mentor, a representative of an entire generation of hip-hop. Every role carried expectations. Every decision affected more than just himself. And while fans saw the confidence and charisma, they didn't always see the exhaustion that comes from carrying such a massive public identity for so many years. Because the truth about becoming an icon is that the world starts expecting you to always be strong. People want the jokes. They want the wisdom. They want the unforgettable moments. But they rarely ask what it costs to keep producing them. As Snoop entered his mid-50s, one question became impossible to ignore. After decades of making the world smile, what happens when the person behind that smile finally allows himself to acknowledge the pain he's been carrying all along? For more than 3 decades, Snoop Dogg has mastered the art of making life look effortless. The relaxed voice, the endless jokes, the calm confidence, the ability to walk into almost any room and instantly make people smile. These qualities became part of his identity. To fans around the world, Snoop represented someone who had figured out the secret to staying cool no matter what life threw at him. But as he entered his 50s, a different side of Snoop began to appear. Not the entertainer, not the businessman, not the global superstar, the person. Because after a lifetime of victories, losses, responsibilities, and expectations, Snoop started reflecting on something many people avoid discussing: the emotional cost of carrying a legacy. The world often sees success as the destination. But for people who achieve extraordinary levels of fame, success can come with a hidden burden. Suddenly, everyone knows your name. Everyone has an opinion about you. Everyone expects something from you. And after years of being viewed as larger than life, it can become difficult to simply exist as a normal person. Snoop has often spoken about the importance of family, spirituality, and personal growth, especially as he has gotten older. The conversations became less focused on proving himself and more focused on appreciating the moments that cannot be bought. That change came from experience. He had already witnessed too much loss. He had watched friends leave too soon. He had experienced personal heartbreak. He had seen how quickly circumstances could change. Those lessons shaped the way he viewed time. Earlier in his career, time was something to chase. More songs, more opportunities, more success, more achievements. But now, time had become something to protect. Every conversation with family mattered. Every memory with loved ones mattered. Every moment became more valuable because he understood something many people don't realize until later in life. The things you spend your entire life chasing are often not the things you miss when they're gone. This perspective also influenced the way Snoop approached his role as a father and grandfather. For years, he had been building a future for his family. But as his children became adults and his grandchildren grew older, he entered a new stage of life. Instead of simply providing, he focused more on guiding. He wanted the next generation to learn from his mistakes, not just his achievements. Because behind the famous name was someone who had made difficult choices. Someone who had experienced consequences. Someone who understood that success without wisdom could still leave you empty. One of the most interesting parts of Snoop's journey is how comfortable he became acknowledging his imperfections. Many celebrities spend years protecting an image of perfection. They carefully control what the public sees and hide anything that might make them appear vulnerable. Snoop took a different approach. He embraced his humanity. He talked about mistakes. He talked about growth. He talked about changing as a person. That honesty helped people connect with him in a completely different way. He was no longer just the rapper who became famous in the 1990s. He became a reminder that people can evolve. They can learn. They can become better versions of themselves. But perhaps the most difficult challenge of aging in public is accepting that the world remembers every version of you. Fans still remember the young Snoop from the death row era. They remember the controversies. They remember the headlines. They remember the songs that defined an entire generation. But Snoop himself has continued moving forward. And that creates a unique tension. The public wants to preserve the legend they discovered. But the person behind the legend keeps changing. At 54, Snoop Dogg isn't trying to recreate the past. He's trying to understand it. He's trying to make peace with everything that brought him here. The struggles, the mistakes, the losses, and the victories. And perhaps the most emotional part of his story is that the pain he carried was never always visible. The world saw the laughter. The world saw the confidence. The world saw the icon. But behind that image was a man who had spent decades learning how to survive, adapt, and keep going. And now, after everything he has experienced, one final question remains. When the music fades, the cameras turn off, and the world stops watching, what does Snoop Dogg truly want his legacy to be? After more than 3 decades in the spotlight, Snoop Dogg has reached a place few entertainers ever experience. He is no longer chasing approval. He is no longer trying to prove he belongs. He is no longer fighting for the opportunity to be heard. The world already knows his name. But the interesting thing about reaching that level of success is that the questions begin to change. When you're young, you ask, how do I become somebody? But after a lifetime of accomplishments, the question becomes much deeper. What will people remember about me when I'm gone? For Snoop, that answer appears to have less to do with fame and more to do with impact. The music will always be part of his story. His albums, performances, and influence on hip-hop culture have secured his place in entertainment history. Few artists have managed to remain relevant across as many generations as Snoop Dogg. But when he speaks about his future, he often focuses on something much more personal. Family, community, helping others, creating opportunities, leaving behind something meaningful. Because over time, Snoop learned that a legacy isn't built only through what a person achieves. It's built through what they give. This understanding helped shape many of his efforts outside music. He became involved in youth programs, mentorship opportunities, and community initiatives designed to give young people alternatives and guidance that he wishes he had more of during his own childhood. The same streets that once presented danger became the reason he wanted to create opportunities for others. Snoop understood something powerful. A person's past does not have to limit their future. His own life was proof. The teenager from Long Beach who once faced uncertainty became someone capable of influencing millions around the world. But perhaps the most meaningful part of his transformation is that he never completely abandoned where he came from. Despite becoming a global celebrity, Snoop has consistently maintained a connection to his roots. He continues celebrating Long Beach, supporting those around him, and acknowledging the people who helped shape his journey. Because without the struggles, there would be no story. Without the difficult moments, there would be no growth. Without the losses, there would be no appreciation for what truly matters. At 54, Snoop Dogg represents something bigger than a successful rapper. He represents evolution. He represents survival. He represents the ability to change without forgetting where you started. The young man who once had to navigate uncertainty became the man who now tries to create certainty for others. The artist who once searched for an escape became someone trying to build a better path for the people coming after him. And perhaps that is the biggest lesson hidden inside his story. The world often measures celebrities by their achievements. How many records did they sell? How much money did they make? How many awards did they win? But eventually, those numbers become less important. What remains are the relationships, the memories, the people whose lives were changed because you were there. For Snoop Dogg, the greatest victory may not be becoming famous. It may be becoming someone his family can be proud of. Someone who survived the pressure of fame without losing the person he was underneath it all. Someone who experienced pain but refused to let it make him bitter. Someone who turned his struggles into lessons and his lessons into opportunities for others. And that may be the most surprising truth about Snoop Dogg. The man the world first discovered as a rebellious young rapper became something completely different over time. A father, a grandfather, a mentor, a businessman, a symbol of longevity. A person who learned that the most valuable things in life were never the things that made him famous. Because after all the concerts, the headlines, the awards, and the unforgettable moments, one truth remains. The greatest legacy isn't about how many people know your name. It's about how many people are better because they did. And for Snoop Dogg, the final chapter of his story may not be about what he achieved. It may be about what he leaves behind.